Please be seated and find this painting that was in your bulletin. This is Van Gogh's rendition of the Good Samaritan. And when I'm looking at artwork to accompany worship, which we do every week at Community Underground, not so much up here, I always try to find the rendition that grabs a moment that we are not expecting from the story. Everybody's drawn a picture of the guy laying in the ditch, right? Not everybody's drawn this. So, tell me, what do you see? This is not rhetorical, by the way. We're going to have a conversation. What do you see? What do you notice?
I see two people walking away.
Oh, good catch, Mark. Yeah, there are two people walking away. One here and one back here in the distance. You see what? An empty trunk. Somebody's been robbed of all of their things. Yes? What else do you see? Isn't it, though? Well, I mean, perhaps it's kind of hard to tell which one is being helped. But yeah, it does look like somebody's being lifted up on that horse. Oh. Pat McQuillan with all the context clues, yes. Perhaps the man who does not have a shirt is the one who has been robbed. And no shoes, no shoes. But then there's a man who has a hat and a cloak, yes. And the story tells us he's putting him on his own animal. What else do you see? Choir, do you see anything? Linda?
It wasn't easy to get him on board.
Yeah, that does not look easy at all, does it? The horse doesn't even look like he's too excited about that either. He's kind of doing this, like, what? He's got one foot ready to leave. What else do you see? Strong humanity and servanthood. Really easy to read this story and forget how much humanity is involved in serving each other. It's messy work, isn't it? It's not always clean. It's not always easy. What else do you see?
It's up close, very intimate, lots of touching.
Mm-hmm.
You could smell him.
Yeah.
Sweaty, dirty.
Yeah, this go and do the same that we are called to do. It's messy. It's up close and personal. It is not hermetically sealed. There are good boundaries involved, but sometimes it's a little messy. Yes. Anyone else? Janelle just said, I see good things happening even though the Samaritan knows that by helping someone else, there are things at risk. There are things at risk, indeed. Continue to think on this, would you? And let us prepare for the word preached. O God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be found acceptable in your sight, for you are our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. So 7 years ago, CUCC's search committee chair invited the candidating pastor and her family over to his house for dinner with his family after the day's festivities of preaching a candidating sermon and congregational vote had concluded. That candidating pastor was me.
And that search committee chair was me.
So Dave and I are sitting in Grant and Jennifer's dining room with a 2-year-old Chloe and 10-year-old Jake and Dale eating soup, when I turn to Grant and say, Grant, you're a PK.
PK means pastor's kid.
Grant, you're a PK and a double PK at that.
Which means that both of my parents were pastors.
And most PKs I know ran screaming from the church a long, long time ago. But here you are. You didn't run screaming. You're part of a church and you are actively involved. Why?
I don't know.
I have been asking Grant this question repeatedly for the past 7 years. This week, we sat down at the Robinolt's kitchen table to talk about today and the launch of Community UCC's stewardship campaign, Go and Do. We talked about why this moment in the life of our church matters and why stewardship of our financial resources is a faith practice that we keep here at CUCC. We talked about how our financial support of this church makes a real, tangible impact on the lives of its members and the community beyond our walls. We talked about this year's stewardship theme and how it connects so very deeply to the new beginnings process and the discernment work our church is doing so that we might live with intention into our future. And at long last, after 7 years of asking the question, Grant told me why he's a PK who didn't run screaming from the church, but stayed and takes an active role. Grant's story connects with the story of the Good Samaritan and Jesus' instruction to go and do the same. Take a listen.
My mom was ordained in the 1950s. My dad was ordained shortly after. The family story goes that my dad got ordained because he couldn't stay out of my mom's job. So my parents always shared a church as co-pastors, and they did not have a division of labor. Instead of divvying up responsibilities, they shared a job and a half, and they served churches in Oberlin, Ohio, Tampa, Florida, Pasadena, California, and Walla Walla, Washington. So as a result of the way that they arranged this sort of non-division of labor, there was always debriefing that went on. Church was always the dinner table conversation. And that gave me exposure to the wonderful, life-changing parts of church and all of the messy parts of church.
Grant, this sermon is supposed to encourage people, so, maybe we should downplay the messy parts.
I can't downplay the messy parts. I saw the messiness every night around the dinner table as my parents updated each other on who was hospitalized, what decision was made by the trustees about the roof, and how to find enough Sunday school teachers.
It's always the question, isn't it? So, you mean to tell me that at dinner you found out that church people are not perfect?
That's right. Seeing all of this provided me with an understanding early in life. Everyone has challenges. It's not just that there's a group of people who has struggles. It's not just this type of person who faces challenges. No. Every single person and every last family must endure a life challenge at some point.
So no one is perfect. People aren't just what you see on the surface.
I learned as a kid that we can all walk in with a smile, but underneath that smile, everyone is struggling with or wrestling with something. Everyone.
And here in worship, in conversation with other members of our faith community, we don't have to pretend like everything is perfect.
For me, knowing that this was part of life helped me manage challenges more easily when the first major life crisis arrived.
So instead of declaring, something must be wrong with me, and your whole life derailed, you had a context within which to view struggles and a support system called the church that was already in place.
Yes, crisis was just part of my reality growing up. I saw not only my parents, but the whole church helping people, helping each other get through those crises, and work pretty darn hard doing it.
So give us an example.
I grew up in a time when there was no email and no cell phones. Our house phone rang all the time. There was a woman in my parents' congregation who was an alcoholic, who called all the time. When she would call and say, "This is Mrs. Oldsmobile," or "Mrs. Buick calling," it was a code. It was a code that she was drunk and she really needed help. Help from a pastor.
Our phone still rings, but we also get our lion's share of text messages and private Facebook messages and emails at all hours of on and off days. And my girls are very familiar with the phrase, "Someone from church needs my help. Mama's got to go. I'll be back later." And you can bet without a doubt, that if I've met you early in the morning before surgery or late at night at the emergency room, that Chloe has prayed for you because she started asking me what she could do to help. When you face one of those life crises that Grant mentioned, there's probably an 8-year-old who's holding you in the light of God's love. That's what it means to be church.
Because my parents were pastors, I saw the ways in which stewardship mattered. I saw how someone providing their time, talent, and treasure mattered. When church members gave their time to the church or used their talents in the service of the church, it freed up my parents to tend to people's needs when they popped up. When people showed up at church to help with all the details and the millions of jobs that always needed to be done to keep a church running, hopefully smoothly, it freed my parents up to plan worship so that people could be filled back up to face their own challenges. And when the congregation gave of their treasure, when they dedicated part of their household budget to the church's budget, I saw my parents, as pastors, be able to share love in more extravagant ways because the resources were there.
And what did you see when the resources weren't there?
I saw their anxiety over budgets that fell short. I saw congregations get creative about how to supplement their budget. Our church in Pasadena, California was spread out over 6 floors and had 117 rooms. We had a roller rink in the basement. Yes, this was Southern California in the 1970s. So the church's survival in many ways was based on renting out space.
Just like our survival at times is dependent on renting out space. And if you think I don't have anxiety about our budget and about our giving, oh, think again. There are times when I lose a lot of sleep about what we're going to do about the budget.
But I also saw what happened when stewardship soared, when people increased their giving, when church people found their niche in the church and were able to use the skills that they have to make the church community thrive. Then the benefits roll down from there and affect all of us.
When we as a church love God with our whole heart and mind and strength, and love our neighbors as ourselves, then we are free to be able to respond to the guy in the ditch. We're able to go and do the same as the story goes.
Sometimes I'm the guy in the ditch. Sometimes you are. None of us knows when life is going to come along, beat us up, and leave us for dead. We don't know when financial problems, death, relationship problems, family problems, mental health problems, physical health, spiritual health problems are going to pop up. But being a part of a faith community means we are surrounded by a community that can respond. Whether that's a pastor, a caring community, a meal, a drive to a doctor's appointment, a listening ear, a shoulder to cry on. When we are part of a church that takes stewardship writ large seriously, when everything falls apart and we are the guy in the ditch, we receive help and hope from our church.
And let's face it, living in this community few of us have extended family who live here in the surrounding community, who can swoop in when life falls apart. Let's face it, we're it for each other for the most part. Sometimes we're the guy in the ditch, and sometimes we are the Good Samaritan.
I think of stewardship like this. In a very practical sense, yes, we need money to literally keep the lights on. But it's also a way of making an investment and expecting some kind of dividend on those investments. When you give, you are making an investment. You don't know when or how or to whom those dividends are coming, but when you invest in the ministry of Community United Church of Christ, you are guaranteeing that someone will benefit from your investment. I invest in this community of faith so that whomever is broken in a ditch near us can receive help and hope. That's what we're called to do. That's what I was taught to do. That's the right thing to do, and that's what I want to teach my children to do as well.
This summer and fall, we have been inundated with thank yous from people who have been the guy in the ditch, people who have benefited from your investment in the church. You've heard some of these stories. Remember, the man who came up to me at our booth at Taste of Champagne looked at our sign and thanked us for being a theologically progressive church in this community. And remember, the man who came up to me at Taste of Champagne and thanked me for the words that I offered in your name at the Pulse Vigil. Remember the email we received a few weeks ago from a person who attended here when they were in college some 15 years ago. They'd grown up in a conservative church, and our progressive theology was life-saving for them. Remember the card that our church received from a person who picked up one of those rainbow hearts that said, "You are loved just as you are." They picked one of those up off the ground at Pride Fest and told us in that letter that they've been carrying that heart around with them in their wallet since that day. And remember, I told you a couple of weeks ago how we heard from Sam Deweese, one of our former soloists, who's been able to connect with a UCC colleague of mine and find a church home in London, England. He's found another community to be part of when he's so far away from home. And then, this week, I got a message from an old church camp friend of mine who said, "I was at a Reds game in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was talking with the people sitting next to me. Lo and behold, they were from Champaign-Urbana, and I asked if they knew you. And they said, we were at the Pulse Vigil, and we remembered the words that she said at the Pulse Vigil." Again, people whose lives were changed because of the ministry of this church. And then this week, I received an email from a former CUCCer who's moved on and who's been in the ditch more times than they would like to count. And they said, "Not a day goes by that I don't think of the people of Community United Church of Christ." And the line, "You are welcome here, and we really mean it." It's one of the things that helped this person climb out of the ditch.
Our church has a history of being the Good Samaritan. We go and do the same and have for generations. From our founders' stance as abolitionists, to being the church that started the Martin Luther King Jr. celebration in this town, to our continual outreach to university students, to our part in the founding of the Time Center, to our long history with Habitat for Humanity, to our bold outreach to the LGBT community in this town, Community UCC has been going and doing in Champaign-Urbana since its very birth.
Stewardship makes go and do possible. It doesn't happen any other way. I don't know if you realize this, but we don't receive money from a bigger place. We don't receive money from a denomination or from other sources. It's not like the money fairy shows up and pays our light bill. It does not. We keep the lights on because of what you give. We have tools to do ministry as members of this church because of what you give. We have professional staff equipped to do the work of the church because of what you give. And all of this only happens because of what you give and how we allocate our resources.
This year, as part of the stewardship process, we wanted to rethink the way we give. You will not find a suggested increase in your pledge packet. No, we want you to completely reconsider how you personally invest in the ministry of this church. As a double PK, I can tell you what you give matters. What would happen if everyone increased their giving by 5%, 50%, 500%? Our Church Life Board is committed to presenting a balanced budget to the congregation. What would happen this year if they had a surplus instead of a deficit? What if they had to deliberate over what to give extra to instead of what to cut from?
And maybe you don't make a pledge. Maybe that's not what your household does. Well, perhaps think of it this way. Think of all of the things that you pay for in life. Think of your subscription to Amazon or Hulu, or your subscription to Birchbox, or think of what you pay for cell service or Wi-Fi. Think of how much money you spend going out to eat or to the movies. If this stewardship language that Grant and I are talking about doesn't connect with you, then perhaps think of making a pledge to your church the way you pay a user fee or you pay a subscription. What would you give then? What would you give and dedicate to the ministry of this church if you thought of it the way that you pay for products and services in other aspects of your life?
What would you give so that our church could go and do the same in extravagant, life-changing ways?
I want to invite you to find that heart again, the one that says go and do. And you'll see in your bulletin that the next thing is a new way to do silent meditation. I was at a continuing education event last week called the Why Christian Conference. And after the message, they had a time of silent meditation, but the preacher for that hour talked about how she grew up in a tradition where they had altar calls and that she wanted to change that and switch it. So instead of having an altar call, we would have an altering call. She asked the question, how have you been altered by what you have just received? How have you been changed by what you have just received? She asked that during the time of the altering call, you consider that, how you have been changed. And that you take a few minutes to write some notes down, or you pray about it, or for you all, you hold this heart in your hand, and you consider what it is that you are called to go and do. The worship committee has wooden hearts ready for you every week of this worship series. And today, they want to invite you to place the wooden heart in the offering plate as it comes around. So during this time of altering call, I would invite you to think about what you are called to go and do. And then whenever the plate comes your way, to place the heart in the offering plate and to offer it up to God, to bless and to multiply, and to use in the service of the ministry of this church, so that we might all be able to go and do the same. Amen.